Hey, this is Maya Basics 3, Timing and Workflow Techniques. We're also going to talk a lot about animation principles in this class. So open up your project file. You see a ball sitting there, all rigged, ready to go. Set up your layout like I have here, where your perspective and camera at the top, on either side, doesn't matter. And you should have your graph editor at the bottom here. So it's a 3-panel layout. Alright, so let's set a layout that we can use all the time. One thing's for sure, you definitely need the camera view up and you need the perspective view up and also your graph editor. So just go over to the area on the left side just under the toolbar where you can choose a layout and just right click and go to perspective graph hypergraph. That'll get us close to where we need to be. So right away we have our perspective view on the left side here and we have our graph editor at the bottom. In every panel we have the same menu set in every panel. So we have panels here, we have show, we can show different things. So what you want to do in this perspective view is go show none. So it'll show nothing. In the perspective view you want to show polygons. If there's NURBS in the scene you'll want to show NURBS, but there isn't any in this scene. You'll want to show NURBS curves. So those are our control curves that we select for controlling our objects and characters. Basically just NURBS curves, polygons, and cameras. You don't really need to see the lights. You will need to see the camera so you can move it around. Sometimes you'll need to show locators if there's any locators in the scene, but there isn't any in this scene. And then we're going to make this the camera window by going to Panels, Perspective, and then we'll select Camera. Okay, so for the camera you want to see the outlines of the camera, so we're going to go back to Show. We don't want to see the NURBS curves in the camera view, but you want to see the NURBS surfaces is already checked. Doesn't matter, there's no NURBS in this scene, so you can just leave that checked. Polygons is already checked, and you'll definitely want to show dimensions. If you turn dimensions off, you won't see your frame counter. So we'll definitely leave dimensions on. And that should be good for the camera view. So this is basically what you would have. Anywhere in this area of the toolbar, you can right click and go Save Current Layout, and that'll save all the settings that you just changed. So you go to Save Current Layout, and then you can just name your layout. Just give it a name, My Layout or whatever you want to name it, and then hit OK. And once you do that, I won't do it now because I've already done one, but once you do that, if you go to the toolbar and you right click in this bottom part of the toolbar, you'll see it'll appear here. And I have 3 saved layouts here. And that's how you save a layout. So whenever you open up Maya or you open up a scene and if the layout's not set to your layout, you can just right click, go to your layout, and it'll snap right to the layout that you saved. So in this class we're going to be doing 2 different exercises just to sort of demonstrate to you some basic animation principles, the workflow, and some other software related stuff. So animation principles are so important for creating believable, professional quality animation. They're so important in fact that if you try and get a job, usually when you go to get a job as an animator, you bring your demo reel, you send them your demo reel or bring your demo reel with you. And usually there's a director or an animation supervisor or somebody like that, the head of an animation department who's interviewing you for the job. So they'll look at your animation. You'll look at it together usually in a boardroom or an office on a TV screen or a computer, and they'll look at your work, and if it doesn't display or if it doesn't demonstrate any animation principles, they absolutely won't hire you. The animation principles have to be used, but they have to be used well. You have to use them in a creative way, and that's where the creativity comes in with animation, is how you actually employ the animation principles in your work. Alright, so I just wanted to take this time to actually explain the difference between frames, keyframes, and key poses. So frames are, if you look on your timeline here, we're on frame 1. These are frames on your timeline. Individual frames as we scroll through. You can consider each one a drawing or a piece of paper. Keyframes are when we select a control and we press S on our keyboard like we did in the last class, it creates a keyframe. So we select a control, we press S on our keyboard, and you see that red tick there, that's that red line on the timeline. That's a keyframe. And then key poses are something different. Key poses is a term that derives from traditional or classical animation, where on a piece of paper they would pose a character or an object into a key pose. Sequential drawings in different key poses, it defines the action that's taking place. So a key pose is the position our object is in or character, and the software will set a keyframe for that key pose. So I'll explain as we go to make that more clear. Alright, so let's have a look at this ball rig. So go to your perspective view, spacebar, and we'll just take a look at this. So you'll see in the layers area there's a stage here, There's a camera and there's lights. Don't suggest you move the lights. This scene is already set up to render. And we have our camera, which we can't select in the perspective view, so we don't want that to be locked. Okay, so I'm just going to bounce out for a minute. You'll notice now that we're using a specific camera. This camera is a special camera that's been set up so that you can't move it in the camera view. If you try to orbit, it doesn't move, it just snaps back. Also too, when we scrub along the timeline, we're going to see our frames here in the corner. That's so that when you submit me your QuickTime movies or your QuickTime videos, I can see what frame you're on at what time and make suggestions. So that's a special camera. The only way you can move the camera is to go into your outliner. Go to Window, Outliner, and you select under Camera. You'll see we have the stage, which is just the NURBS plane. We have lights already set up in the scene. There's just 3 lights, 2 directional lights, and a spotlight on top. So the scene's already lit. The ball rig is here, and then we have the camera. So if you hit the little plus sign next to the camera, it'll expand this a little bit. If you select position, you can use your translate and rotate manipulators to move the camera around, and you'll see the result in the camera view. So if I move this camera, you can see that the camera is moving in the camera view, or we can rotate it. But for this exercise, we can pretty much keep it locked. Or if you want to frame this a little bit differently, you can go ahead and do that if you want to get it closer. It's always better to use these manipulation handles rather than grab the center. That's how all of our scenes are going to be set up. So let's take a look at the rig. First thing you want to do in your Maya is go to the top and push this button in. It's called Select Surface Objects. If it's not pushed in, you're able to select the geometry. But we don't want to select the geometry right now. We want to just select the controls. So these are these control curves. So just push this button in here, and then you won't be able to select anything that's an object. Just controls. And you'll see in the layer area here we have our stage. So you can turn the stage off just for now. And if you want to turn the grid off, you can go to Window, Display, and you'll see grid is checked. If you uncheck that, the grid will disappear as well. So I'm just going to do that just so I can show you guys this rig. Alright, so if you select this top control here, it's just the top of the ball control. It'll help it squash. You can translate it in any way, and you can rotate it as well. There's another one on the bottom, does the exact same thing. This control here is the ball rotate control. If you try to move that, it doesn't do anything, but it rotates the entire ball. This here is the ball move control. So this takes the entire thing. It takes all the controls with it except for this. You'll see this master control here. So if we select that one, this is the placement control or position control. This takes the entire thing with it as well. So in traditional animation, they drew the key poses for the objects or the characters, and they created in-between drawings in between each key pose to make the animation appear to be moving smoothly along. So the key poses basically plan out all the poses of the action, and the in-between drawings smoothen it out. And also too, this is how you control the timing of your animation as well. So for me, the most important animation principles are timing and posing. If your timing's really good, your posing's not done very well, then the end result's not going to be very, very nice. It goes the other way around too. If your posing's really good but your timing's off, the end result's not going to be very good. So we have timing and posing both have to be there. Instead of creating a drawing, every time we put this ball into a new position, we're going to keyframe all the controls on one frame, and then you can consider that as one sheet of paper if we were talking about classical animation. And then we'll go down the timeline, put the ball into a new pose, and then select all the controls and keyframe it again, so that the entire pose is just keyed on one frame. And that's like another sheet of paper. Alright, so before we start animating, we need to set up a way to select all of our controls at once and key our entire ball, all the controls for our entire ball in one frame. We're going to block our animation out on the timeline first, and then we're going to refine it in the graph editor. Blocking is basically just putting in your rough animation. It's a rough draft of your animation. After we do the rough blocking, we'll refine the timing a little bit on the timeline by sliding our poses around, and then we will start refining in the graph. So there's 2 different ways you can go about keying all the controls of an object or character at one time. You can create a character set, or you can create a shelf button. Okay, so to create a character set, you have to shift select all the controls. So we're going to select the first one, hold shift down and select each control. There's one underneath here, don't forget that. And we'll select this too. So we have all the controls selected. You go to character set, create character set, option box, and then give it a name. I already have ball in there. You can name it ball or whatever else you like. Under attributes, it says all keyable except translate rotate. So make sure it's set up just like this, with scale and visibility checked. And then press create character set. As soon as you do that, you'll notice that your translation and rotation values the channels have turned yellow. That means that there's a connection there now, and down at the bottom of your interface, you see here in the character set area, this little arrow just turned red, where before it was gray. And you can see it says ball. If you hit that arrow, you can turn it off by pressing none, and if you hit it again, you can select ball again. So when it's on, all you have to do, I'm just going to click off into space here. All you have to do is press S on your keyboard, and it will set a key. So I'm going to delete that. So when you go anywhere in your timeline here, if you press S on your keyboard, you don't have to have the controls selected. You just change the pose or the position of the object. You press S and it keys all the controls. Change the pose, press S, keys everything again. Just going to undo all that. So that's one way to key all the controls at one time, which you're really going to want to do as we get into more character animation stuff. And even now for this ball, you want to be able to key all the controls on one frame. The other way to do it is to actually create a shelf button. You can see here, this is one of my custom shelves. I just created a shelf and made all these buttons for different things that we're going to be doing in this program. What we can do is create a new shelf by hitting this little button, go to New Shelf, and just give it a name. I'm just going to call it Ball, and OK. And then you'll see a new tab appear up here. So that's our ball shelf. What we want to do is place a button on this shelf like I have here, but we're just going to have one button for the ball. So to do that, you go down to your script editor here, at the bottom right hand corner, and you'll see all this jibber jabber here. Just go to Edit, Clear All, just to get rid of all of it, and then from there you're going to shift select each control again. If you make a mistake, you have to go to Edit and Clear All again. So I'll just select one, these top and bottom ones first, and then carefully select each control, and you'll see every time you select a control, you'll see a little Mel script appear for it. So what we're going to do is make a button out of this Mel script that tells Maya to select everything. So just drag over all of it, make sure it's all highlighted. Middle mouse button click on the highlighted text and drag it over to your shelf, holding down the middle mouse button. As soon as you see the plus sign appear next to your pointer, you can release, and then it'll ask you Mel, Python, or cancel. Go to Mel. And as soon as you do that, you'll see this new button appear on your shelf. So if you click off and click it again, it should select all the controls, and you should see that script appear again. So we don't need the script editor anymore, so I'm just going to close that up. So go again to this button here, go to Shelf Editor, and here's the script under Shelf Contents. You'll see the script. You can change the name right here if you want to rename it. I don't usually bother, but select the script. Go down to Icon Label and give it a name. Now when you're naming one of these buttons, it only accepts 4 characters, so luckily Ball has 4 characters in it. I'll just name it Ball and save all shelves. And then you'll see the name appear here on your button. So when we click that button, it selects all the controls. Now the only difference between the character set option and the button option is that with character sets, you don't have to select anything. You just hit S on your keyboard and it'll key all the controls that you placed on the character set. With the shelf button, when you select it, it actually selects everything. I recommend that you go with the shelf button because in production sometimes character sets don't work with the pipeline. You'll have to go with the shelf button anyway. Also too, and even the more important reason is that you know when you have something selected and you can see all the keys in the timeline. Alright, so let's go ahead and block in this ball bouncing without any animation principles at all. So I have my outliner minimized here. I'm just going to bring it back up. So I'm going to select my camera, use the position node, and you can frame this a little differently if you want, as long as we can see the entire ball going through its motions. So select the placement control and bring it up close to the top of camera frame. Hit our button to select all the controls and press S on our keyboard. So it keys everything at the top. So let's just space this out evenly. We'll go to frame maybe 5, and then just select the placement control, bring it down. I'm just going to look underneath the floor, underneath the stage for a minute. So you want it to just intersect a tiny bit just to make sure that it's touching. And we'll press S on our keyboard. We'll go to frame 10. We'll just space these 5 frames apart. And we'll go back up to the top again. Now to make sure that that's in the same place as the last bounce, we can just copy frame 1. Go to frame 10, right click and paste. And it'll just snap it right into, it'll just copy our frame 1 to frame 10 just so it's in the right position. Alright, so let's drag our range slider to frame 9, so that right after we see frame 9, it'll jump right back to frame 1. So we can just we can drag it to frame 9, or we can type it in over here. And then when we play that, you see the ball bouncing. Now that's a little fast. So one thing I'd like to talk to you about is timing and spacing. So when we're planning out our timing, it's basically the spacing between the poses, the positions. So you can see these are 5 frames apart and it's moving very fast. Now the great thing about software is it does the in-betweening for you. In classical animation, all these spaces in between our keyframes would have been extra drawings that they would have had to have done. And then where these key poses are the key positions. Because that's really fast, we're just going to slow it down a little bit. And the way we can slow it down is basically just to select the ball control and make sure we got all the controls. And we can spread these keys further apart. So I'm going to make more space between the first and second key pose. So we can hold shift down and select all these keys that come after it. And just slide them down the timeline, say maybe 3 frames. And then we'll select the last one and move it down 3 frames. So let's make sure they're spaced evenly apart. You can step down the timeline by holding Alt down and pressing your greater than less than keys. That allows you to step from frame to frame. And then if you want to go from keyframe to keyframe on the timeline, you don't hold Alt down, you just press the greater than less than keys. And you can pop from pose to pose. So that's a nice way to check your animation as you're going through your blocking. So we'll set that to 14. It's the frame before the last one. And we can watch that now. Okay, so you can see that's a little slower since we spaced the keyframes apart. So let's make a play blast of this. Now throughout the entire program, before we play blast something, I want you to select the camera and we can see the framing a little bit better. It's just more clear when it's selected and it's all green. And we can also see the frame count a little bit better as well. Make sure your textures are on by pressing 6 on the keyboard in your camera view. And then go right click anywhere on your timeline and go to Play Blast option box. Alright, so your Play Blast settings should look like this. Format should be QuickTime. The encoding should be H.264. Just crank up the quality to 100, crank up the scale to 100. Frame padding should already be at 4. And display size, go from render settings. You can go from window or render settings, but I want you guys to keep it on from render settings. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the render settings and change those settings. Under the save options here, if you have the top one clicked, it will make a movie file, but it won't save it anywhere. But we want to save ours, so we're going to have the bottom one clicked, save to file, and then you can browse. I'm just going to put mine on the desktop for now, but you can browse to whatever folder you like, and then you can just give it a name. I'm going to call it Ball No Principles, and then hit save. Before I actually hit the play blast button, I'm going to change my render global settings. So you hit this little button up here, looks like a clapper with 2 dots on the side. Go down to where it says image size, presets, go to custom, or it says should say custom already. Let's just change it to HD 720. So that's how I want you to submit all of your videos. Once you change this to HD 720, it should be in all the Maya files. But if it's not, just check it, make sure it's set to HD 720. And then you'll see underneath it's 1280 by 720. Hit close, just close that up. And then when you play blast, and then the next thing you need to do is go to make sure your camera view is highlighted or selected, and then hit spacebar to go full screen. And now you can hit play blast. Now when we play that, this is our QuickTime video. The reason why I like QuickTime is we can scrub through them. And as you're scrubbing through, you can see the frame count up in the top left corner. Also too, you can go to view and go half size if you like, or back to normal size. You can also go full screen. Alright, so we're going to play this and we're going to hit control. We're going to hold control down and tap L on our keyboard so that it loops. And there we have our ball bounce cycle with no animation principles. So let's just put that to the side. Alright, spacebar again to get out. And now we're going to animate this ball again with principles. So I'm going to hit my ball button to select everything. I'm just going to range slide out for a little bit, and let's just delete these last 2 keyframes. We're going to start employing some animation principles now. So we're going to think about timing. So I want you guys to start estimating your timing, and we know that if your poses are farther apart, the motion is going to move slower. If the poses are closer together with less in-betweens in the middle, your animation is going to move a lot faster. The closer they are together, the faster it moves. So 1 frame apart would just be a pop, and 24 frames apart would be a whole second, because it's at 24 frames per second. So we're just going to go, we want this ball to start moving slowly at the top of its bounce, so it's going to ease out of this position into its next position. So let's go to frame 6, and this is just the blocking stage, so this is rough. We're going to adjust the timing after anyway. So let's go down to, let's select this placement control and move the ball down about, let's say, halfway. and then press your ball button to select all the controls, and press S on your keyboard. So if we scrub over that, we have this action. As the ball's starting to drop, it's obviously going to start moving faster as it accelerates toward the ground. So we want our next key pose to be closer together. So let's go about 3 frames. And at this point we can start to stretch the ball out a little bit. So select your placement control again, and we'll go down a little bit more. And at this point we can start to stretch this ball out a little bit. So let's grab the controls for that. Grab the top control and just start to stretch it a little. And we can select all of our controls again and press S on your keyboard. Now our next pose is going to be really quick. So let's just do 1 frame. Let's move it down really close to the ground, almost to the ground, and we'll stretch it out quite a bit. We're going to do this really cartoony, and we're going to exaggerate it a little bit, but as it's starting to accelerate, it's going to stretch out. So let's select all of our controls again. I know we haven't moved all the controls, but just get into the habit of selecting all the controls by pressing your button and then keying it on the timeline. We'll just scrub over it and take a look. So the next position is going to be very quick as well. We're just going to go 1 frame down the timeline, and it's going to squash as it impacts the ground. So let's select our placement control and bring it right down so that the bottom is touching the ground. You can even intersect a little bit just to be sure that it's on the ground plane. And we'll grab that squash control again, and we'll squash it right down. Alright, so now we have this action. We'll scrub over it and just check it. You always want to be scrubbing over your animation and checking it as you're going. Okay, so basically this whole action of this ball bounce, the same action is going to occur as it rises back up. So we're just going to mirror all the keyframes that we did on this side, we're going to mirror them over to the other side. So we'll go to the second last one that we did. First actually select the ball, select all the controls by hitting your button. Copy, go 1 frame over and paste it. So we just did this one, now we'll go to the second last one. Copy, 1 frame over and paste. And then we'll copy this one. Now these are, just check it out, it's 3 frames apart on mine. Copy, and then we'll go 1, 2, 3. And then these ones are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll copy the first one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and paste it. There, so now we should have a full ball bounce. So that's roughed in. Okay, so let's get a cycle going. Let's set our timeline to 20 frames. It's just our range slider, and we'll just hit play. Okay, we need to get this to ease in and out of the top of the bounce, and we need to adjust the timing here so it accelerates faster before it hits the ground. So that's basically what blocking is for, is just doing a rough version of it and then going through and refining your timing. We have all of our posing in. The positions are right. We just need to change the timing a little bit. So we need to make this area a little slower. So to do that, we want to separate the rest. We want to create more in-betweens in here. So we have to select this key and shift drag over everything. And let's give it an extra 1. Let's give it maybe 2 more frames. So I'll bring my range slider out so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side here. 1, 2, 3. So this area should be slower. And then again at the end it will be slower, because we created more in between. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about timing and spacing. The spacing of our poses gives us more in-betweens and changes the timing. Alright, so at this point I'm going to spline all of our keyframes. If you have your graph editor open here, you can select all the keyframes in there and do it. Or you can shift select everything and make all these spline. Leave the first and last key flat though. We want those to ease. Select everything in red, right click, go to tangents and select spline. Or you can simply select all your keys in the graph editor and choose the spline button here. Zoom out to make sure we got everything. And let's play this. So I'll put this back to 25 now. So now you can see that it's easing at the top of the bounce. And you always want the top of the bounce to be a little slower. And then as gravity takes effect on the ball, it accelerates before it impacts the ground. Alright, so let's take a look in our graph editor and see what's happening. You can just grab this and raise it up a little bit so you can see it better. Spread everything out, or you can hit F on your keyboard to frame everything, to frame all your keys. Okay, so let's select our placement control, and we'll go to the translate Y. This is what's causing it to move up and down. And what we can do is bend these, just like we did in the previous graph editor exercise. We can bend these to give it more ease. Remember that a completely flat curve is no motion at all. So if you want to get closer to no motion, you can bend this and make it more flat at the top. That'll cause it to ease more at the top. So we're going to place our time marker in between the first and second key pose. Select the second one, grab the handle and just bend it a little bit. And you can see the result in the panels up top here. So that'll just give it a really nice ease. This is just the refine. Now we're starting to refine our animation. Okay, so we don't want a spline handle on this. We don't want these keys to be spline, because this is where it hits the ground. So we're going to flatten those out, just so that when it hits the ground it doesn't impact and go through the floor and it stays put. Otherwise we have this action. We don't want that. I noticed too it's not actually touching the floor here, so what we're going to do is just go underneath the floor, grab these two keys here, just bring it down so it touches the floor. So let's try increasing that stretch a little bit so it reads a little bit better. So let's select the stretch control, and then we'll go in the graph editor, and to get it to stretch we use the translate Y. So we'll select the translate Y in the graph editor. Let's see if we can get that to stretch a little bit more as it starts to head toward the ground. So we can go to this key and just move that up a little bit. You can see the stretch increasing as we move that up. Should probably do the same thing to both sides. Let's actually start to get it to stretch here a little bit more. So if we bring that up, basically it's going to start stretching at frame 1, but it's not going to do very much because it's almost flat here, and then it starts to accelerate. So it'll start to stretch a little bit earlier. And then over here a little more. So you can see the stretch taking effect a little bit earlier there. And we'll just do the same thing on the other side. You can bend it a bit so it happens more gradually. As we start refining curves here, you'll see these patterns appear, and you'll get to know them a little bit better, how it works. Let's just take a look at this. It's actually looking pretty good. Pretty happy with that, but the bounce isn't reading very well. The point at which it impacts the ground, we want that to read a little bit better to the audience so it reads better. We get more of a springy action happening there. So what we're going to do is actually hold this bounce for 1 frame and give it a bit of a moving hold. So let's hit our ball button here, select everything. Go right to the keyframe where it impacts the ground, and we have that extreme squash. And go to the keyframe next to it. We want to hold this for a frame, so we'll go to the keyframe next to it and slide everything over. Expand this a little bit. Just select all that. Go slide it all over 1 frame to make room. And we're going to actually hold this squashed pose just for 1 frame. You can go copy and paste, or the quick way to do this is to make sure the ball is all selected. Go onto the keyframe that you want to hold for 1 frame, middle mouse button, drag over 1 frame, and then press S, and that'll just copy it over. Or you can just go copy and then go to the next frame and go paste. Either way works. Flatten those out. You can select everything here. You can select those 2 keys where it's holding a squash. Flatten them out. It doesn't really matter because it's happening over 1 frame, so you won't really notice any kind of weirdness, but we have it holding for 2 frames basically. Let's see the result of that. So it actually looks a little better. You can see you can read the bounce a little better with that holding. But what I like to do, just to make sure that it doesn't look like it's sticking, is we'll go back down to where it bounces, and we'll put a bit of a moving hold on it. So that's a hold where it doesn't move at all. If you scrub back and forth, it's completely still. You could either do this and key it, or you can go into your graph editor, select that squash control, go to the translate Y, and just bring that down a little bit. And you can see the result in the panel there. If we go closer up, we can see it. So just grab the second one, the second key that you copied over, and just give it a little more squash or a little more stretch. Either one will give us that effect of springiness. So if we scrub over those now, you can see they're very close, but it just gives us a little bit of extra spring. Alright, so let's play that now. And you can see at the bottom where it impacts the ground, it just feels a lot better. The purpose behind stretch and squash is to really give us that feeling of that the object's being affected by gravity. And you can see how timing makes a huge difference in our animation. Alright, so go full screen, select the camera in your outliner, and we'll go to Play Blast Options. Same as before, make sure Save to File is clicked, and let's browse to where we want to put that. I'm just going to put it on the desktop for now, and I'll call this one Ball with Principles. And let's save that. Play Blast. And there it is. So I'm just going to minimize this. So after you play it, you can hit Control L on your keyboard to get it to loop. So you can see our no principles here. And then we have our ball bounce with animation principles. Notice how the ball on the left doesn't seem to be affected by gravity at all. And the ball on the right does seem to be affected by gravity. So it's the timing and spacing of our poses and the stretch and squash that give it the appearance of weight, of having weight. Alright, so that's it for this class. I'll see you in Maya Basics 4.